in your body. So it's going to be a very short session, but I'm going to make it as interesting as possible for you, and we'll have the last few minutes for discussion for your questions. So if you have anything, like if you're not able to view or if you're not able to listen to my voice, so do message me so that I'll stop at some point and then like I can, revert back to you. So this is the outline. And so first one is I'm going to brief you about like the 21st century nutrition. That's why we have named today's topic title as nutrition. And it's more about like scientific thinking and forecasting nutrition research. So what exactly it is. And we'll jump into genomics, how it started, all about the Human Genome Project, and what is actually nutrigenetics. So it's all about human variations. So there are a lot of information trials that are done every month, and I'm going to give you an overview of that. And we're also going to learn about the workflow. So what happens from the time you collect a sample and how it is processed and how a report is interpreted. And there are a lot of evidences for personalized nutrition. So, like what is the trend and how to use nutrigenetics as a tool. So this is a gist of today's session. So I'll go on to it. So if you have any problems in hearing my voice or in viewing this slide, so please do message so that I can stop and then I can revert to you. So 21st century scientific thinking. Are you all there? If one of you can say yes, then.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So it's more of kind of predictive, I would say. So if you look at the Times Magazine, it's one of the famous magazines that is published across the world, and that also publishes a lot of scientific thinking. That's the latest update. So it's time to personalize diets, so based on predictions. So if you predict someone has having some disease, then probably you want to know about that and then start acting upon it right away. So that's kind of predictive nutrition that we are aiming at in the future. So even before a person gets diabetes, so you predict about someone's disease predisposition and then you give diet plans accordingly. So that's how the future is going to be. We're not going to wait till a disease comes to a person and then we are not interested in treating anymore, rather than we want to prevent the occurrence of disease. And another one is preventive nutrition is the trend, because we don't want a lot of healthcare costs being spent on medications and treatments. Rather, we can use it for identifying and preventing a disease condition, which might save a lot of billions of dollars. I think like we are in the outset of Corona, which has almost crashed the economy. And I think this could have been made better if we could have prevented the occurrence of such pandemic. So likewise, it also applies to nutrition, where preventive nutrition is the buzzword. So we have to start thinking from a preventive paradigm. And personalization, time and again, we have kept changing our principles, right? So we say that butter is bad, like for almost 3 to 4 decades, and suddenly butter becomes like a good thing, good substance to eat. So it's not about like our principles or guidelines, but it keeps changing, because we are not looking at an individual, rather than we are looking at a population. And if you look at 2015 American Dietetic Association guidelines, it said the upper limit of the cholesterol has been removed because they couldn't find substantial evidences for proving cholesterol is the only factor for increased cholesterol levels. So what happens is that like they remove the upper limit of cholesterol. So but 30, 40 years, so there were a lot of things that happened, like low fat, slim milk, slim curd, and so on. So the industry have totally changed. And then like after 40 years, they said like cholesterol is not the villain. So, but this could have been prevented, or these bias could have been overcome if we are looking at individuals rather than looking at population. So this is how our thinking must change and will be changing in the future. And to add to this evidences, so you could see that like there is a article that's published recently, that is like forecasting research in the Journal of American College of Nutrition, so which actually forecasted few areas in nutrition which could be the thrust areas. That is like the first one is global food security, that is food for everyone, so that would be the thrust area. And another thing is about microbiome, so the gut microbiome and the gut microflora, so is one of the other areas where it's going to be like the main area where the research is going to be focused. And another one is bioengineering and gene expression, so you're going to have like a lot of developments happening in this area, because like people are more interested in looking at genetics of a person. And another area where people would be interested, or there would be more research in the future, exactly starting from this year, would be cancer, inflammation, and aging. So the number of people dying out of cancer is more, and thus the nutrition in cancer will be one of the prime focus from this year onwards, and nutrition education. And it will be more of interdisciplinary and cross-discipline collaboration. So it won't be just like, nutrition education or community nutrition education. So we need to have a kind of interdisciplinary approach where we are going to, where we are going to actually combine with other disciplines, like it could be genetics, it could be, the other areas of sciences, biosciences, life sciences. So this is like one of the nutrition research, like forecasting, which was done in 2020. So again, we are talking today about nutrigenetics because of this Human Genome Project. So which is like, it was launched in 2003, and it is like, it took about 13 years for them to complete this project, where they entirely decoded what is present in the human genome or a human body, what exactly it is made up of. And then they developed a vision for personalized medicine in 2003. So it was a 13-year project which actually engaged people, research scientists from all over the world, and they actually developed blueprint of a human. So if you have a blueprint of a building, it's similar to, building a kind of, how do you develop that architecture? It's similarly, you have now the blueprint for a human body or a human being as such. So we'll be able to actually, develop a human being with the data available from the Human Genome Project. And how the Human Genome Project has an implication for nutrition science is, so they were able to find the dots between what kind of disease and what the genes involved for causing that particular disease. So it became easy for us to know what kind of genes are responsible for causing which disease, and thereby what kind of nutrition should be given to that particular individual if they have that particular gene. So with this information, we could actually start personalizing nutrition recommendation. And there was a company named Sionna which launched providing services for personalized nutrition health. Look at the year, so it was launched in 2003. So it was a long way to go, where they actually have this from 2003 onwards. It's almost like 17 years now, and there's a lot of research happening in this area. So keep an eye on this area, because it's booming, and it's also like, it's developing and progressing at a huge rate. So what we are trying to do is we want to actually look at the genetic variability among humans. So if you look at all these pictures, even if you look at mine and yours, so it will be more of, so we are unique and we are similar, that is 99.9% similar, because we all have like 10 fingers in our hands, like one nose, two eyes, but we are 0.1% different. And this difference is attributed to the genetic variability. So that is which underlies the science of nutrigenetics, that is genetic variability. So when we say genetic variability, we specifically talk about the single nucleotide polymorphism, that is SNPs, which accounts for the difference in hair color, which accounts for differences in the disease risk, and which also determines your response to nutrients. That's why as a nutritionist, so we are more interested to learn about this nutrigenetics. So how we are different and what is causing this difference. And this is what actually excites nutritionists. So why do we actually have a difference in terms of responding to these nutrients? So now the concept of personalized nutrition is moving away from a population-based dietary. So far we have like food pyramids, we have guidelines, and we have like a dietary recommendations based on a population. For example, Indians, we have RDA for Indians, and for Nepal, you have like a food pyramid and you have recommendations developed for Nepalis. But what we are trying to do now is so moving away from looking at individuals as a population group rather than like now we want to look at one person and what is the requirement for that individual. So that is what determines the gene-based individual dietary advice. So it is not very nascent. It has actually progressed really well. There are hundreds of nutrigenetic trials which are published every month. And you could see that like these journals, Genes and Nutrition, as well as, these journals are specifically, focused on nutrigenetics. And there's also an International Society of Nutrigenetics and Nutrigenomics, just like your Nepal Dietetic Association. So they are focused on promoting nutrigenomics and nutrigenetic science across the world. So there are a lot of societies and there are a lot of journals that has been focused only on nutrigenetics. So you could also see this Food for Me project where they have done a lot of research about nutrigenetics, and they have also published a lot of scientific publications related to nutrigenetics. So what they have done is they have taken a lot of research studies. They have done studies to find out how it is perceived by various health professionals, consumers across European countries. So it's a one of the place where you could find a lot of articles related to nutrigenetics. So now coming back to what is the effect of personalized nutrition on health behavior. So you could ask, so what is the evidence whether this like personalized nutrition approach is better or the existing dietetic recommendations are better. So one size fits all is what the population-based advice thinks or propagates. Whereas this nutrigenetics is focused on personalized nutrition approach, that is individualized nutrition, and they were able to give some positive results in these research study where they showed that the compliance rate or the people who are following these diet recommendations are much more better than people who are following generic recommendations. And another thing is about it's more effective in terms of improving dietary behavior is one of the results published by this paper. And another one is about improved weight management. So if you look at the weight management, so here it is like the nutrigenetic group. That is people who are following nutrigenetic recommendations, whereas this is like a non-tested or people who are getting very generic recommendations. So here you could see that the nutrigenetic group, it showed like much effective weight loss, that is in terms of BMI. And these were the genes that were tested. So you could see that like there are studies which has shown positive results or significant results in losing weight or in reducing BMI using gene-specific recommendations. So probably what we can do is there are a lot of studies which are done in other population. We can see whether that could be used again in our population. So especially with Nepali population or with Indian population, and we can come up with these studies and find out whether it is really effective or not. But these are only very few studies that have proven the benefit. So here also you could see that nutrigenetic versus non-tested odds of weight loss, odds ratio. So here is on the 30th and 45 days follow-up, you could see these many people have reduced weight, whereas like in 90 days follow-up, as well as 102. So as the days passed by, so you could see the results going up or the number of people, the effectiveness of the recommendations were more with time. So another one is about, while disclosing genetic information, what changes are made in dietary intake? So this is a kind of a randomized control trial. So where they were able to prove that the sodium intake were reduced after giving the nutrigenetic recommendation. And also you could see the sugar levels going down, the added sugars. So it went down after giving. So if you're giving more customized or more individualized nutrition advice, people tend to stick to it. That is, the compliance rates are like usually higher, than the genetic recommendations, and people who are following it. As with the previous studies, you could see as with time the outcome of the the results actually like they were progressing well. So this is the kind of the positive side of nutrigenetic tests, or positive side of giving nutrigenetic recommendation. So first one is you could see the change in dietary behavior, and second one is you could see disclosing genetic information can make it personalized and can bring a change in the dietary intake as well. And the outcome has also is effective when given genetic genetic related or gene based dietary recommendation. So another evidence based treatment for weight management is there is a Stanford study which proved that eating a diet based on his or her genetic makeup, so you could see that the difference in weight inches as well as in weight. So a person following gene based diet, so they were able to see 2.6 inches, whereas people following a very the what to say, it is like the generic diet, it was 1.2 inches. So it was more effective in terms of bringing a change in weight as well as a kind of waist circumference. So you could see more different parameters used to judge the effectiveness of genetically appropriate diet. So what we are trying to say with these studies are, these are evidences which adds up that nutrigenetically tailored diet could be actually better than a generic diet. So it could be low fat, or it could be like high protein, or it could be like low carb diet. So but what exactly is happening is so the diet is not good or bad, but the person who is actually consuming the diet, if you're giving a very appropriate, genetically appropriate diet, then you could see better results which are more effective in a very short time without trial and error. So one size fits all approach is no more effective, is what we are trying to say with all these evidences. See, these people were given low fat diet, and a group of people were given low carb diet. But when you identify their genetic variation and then give, you could actually see more weight loss. So here you could find 14.1% lost weight when they were given genetically appropriate diet. That is like you identify individuals who will benefit with this low fat, and then if you make them to consume low fat, you can actually see 14.1% weight loss instead of 3.1% weight loss. So if on a random, if we actually reduce fat for everyone, we might only see this difference. But if we identify the individuals based on their genetics and then provide this diet, so there's a lot of difference. Identification of genetic makeup actually improves your outcome as well as efficacy. So next one is to give you an overview about what exactly will happen. First one is you collect your sample. A sample could be your saliva sample, or it could be your blood sample, or it could be your cheek swab sample. So that is what we meant by collection of sample, and then it gets transported to the lab. And then once it reaches the lab, the DNA is extracted, and then we do something called as the genotyping, especially the SNP genotyping. The results are interpreted, and a dietitian or a health professional counsels using this gene report. So this is what the exact processing steps include in a genetic testing interpretation. So, and this is what a technical, a kind of illustration given. So there is a kind of, you can extract the DNA from these 3 samples, and then you will extract the DNA, and then it goes into a machine for this genotyping. We actually use more of next generation sequencing methods, and this is how your results come up. So this is what you get. So next one is when we talk about human metabolic individuality, is what is explained by nutrigenetics. So I'll give you a very simple example to understand this. So if you look at this nutrition, so we have always studied how nutrition affects our health outcome. So for example, you want to say like this particular nutrient affects this health outcome. So for example, the high fat products or fatty foods will increase your cholesterol risk, or will increase your cholesterol level. or a particular nutrient, let's say green tea, it increases, it increases your HDL level, for example, or it helps you to lower your LDL levels. So you're associating one nutrient with one health outcome. So this is how nutrition industry or nutrition research has been operating till now. But what we are trying to do is we are also trying to, include the genes now, and then say whether it has an effect on the nutrition and thereby affecting health outcome, whether it is health or disease. So genes, as you could see, there are 3 possible genetic variation. So it could be genotype A, genotype B, or genotype C. So either it could increase the effect, or it could decrease the effect, or it could have no effect at all. So this is the possibilities that a genotype can have on health or disease. So for example, let's take the example of coffee. Everybody drinks coffee. So coffee actually, it has increased, or it could have a decreased, or it could have no effect on cardiovascular disease. So whether drinking coffee can increase the risk, that's one possibility, or in drinking coffee can decrease the effect of cardiovascular disease, that's another possibility, or it could have no effect at all. So this is how we've been looking at nutrition research. So when we do surveys or when we do research, so we will be looking at one nutrient and how it has an effect on the disease or outcome. But when we talk about nutrigenetics, so we also take the genes into account, that is genotype A, B, and C. So we want to check whether this gene is having an effect of coffee, and that has an effect on cardiovascular diseases. So we are looking at genes and nutrient interaction and how it has an effect on nutrition or disease. So for example, if you look at coffee, it has a lot of bioactives, and one such active compound is caffeine. So when you drink coffee, what happens? So this is what happens. So when you drink coffee, the caffeine present in coffee mixes with your bloodstream, and it reaches the liver, where it gets broken down into various metabolites like paraxanthin, and then it further metabolizes to dimethyl uric acid, methylxanthin, and methyl uracil. So what happens is that this enzyme CYP1A2, cytochrome protein, it breaks down caffeine into simpler metabolites. So, and what happens is that these metabolites, so they get metabolized and then they get eliminated in your urine. So this is what happens when you drink coffee. So what happens is this enzyme is encoded by a gene called as CYP1A2 gene. So if you have a particular type of gene, and what happens is this, you metabolize it very efficiently, and this gets broken down and this gets eliminated in your urine. So if you have another type of a gene variation, then what happens is that this happens at a very slow rate, and we call those individuals as slow metabolizer, who takes time to, for this metabolization to happen. Whereas people who actually metabolize it faster, they're called as fast metabolizer. And people who take time to digest and metabolize this, so they're called as slow metabolizers. So slow metabolizers, when they drink coffee continuously, like very frequently, more than 4 to 5 cups a day, what happens is that it gets accumulated in the body. For example, if I'm a slow metabolizer, I take my first cup of coffee at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then before I metabolize and excrete that, if I'm going to drink the second cup of coffee at, let's say, 7:30, 8 o'clock, so I develop a tendency to accumulate the caffeine in my body, and as a result of which, it could lead to various cardiac ailments. So genetic testing will help you to identify who are the individuals who are fast metabolizers and who are going to be the slow metabolizers. And if you could recommend the slow metabolizer to limit the caffeine, or to take different forms of caffeine. For example, green tea also have caffeine, but in a very limited amount. So if you are identifying those individuals, we could actually customize individualized recommendations. So instead of saying just coffee is bad or coffee is good for health, so we are identifying individual based on genetics, and then we are suggesting a recommendation which is more precise in nature. So if someone comes and asks you whether coffee is good or bad, what would you say? So you would say yes or no. yes, go for it, or you will say don't do it because coffee is bad. But identifying genetics and then saying is, it actually improves your efficacy of giving dietary recommendation. So now again here, based on the genotype, we can classify individuals as fast and slow. So if they carry AA genotype, then there are studies which says that they will be fast metabolizers. And if they are AC or CC genotype carriers, so there are studies which have proved that they are likely to be slow metabolizers. In this case, there was a study conducted, a Costa Rican study, which actually conducted these genotyping in 2013 people having myocardial infarction. In addition, they also collected data like food frequency questionnaire and then like blood data and all that. So what they found was, so this is what they found. The first picture explains here. So we always say if a population drinks this much amount of coffee, they are at a risk. So let's say here in the first picture, you could see people drinking more than 4 cups per day are increased risk. But here we are assuming the whole population to have same requirement. Whereas in the second picture and the third picture, you are classifying the group, the whole population, as the slow metabolizer and the fast metabolizer group. And there, see, look at here, even people drinking for more than 4 cups of coffee, they are not at the risk for cardiovascular disease. So here we are saying that it's not the quantity of food, but it is also dependent on the genetics that determines your risk for a particular disease. So here, let's say AA genotype carriers are fast metabolizer. Look at the red one in the third picture. They are at the least risk. They don't have risk at all for cardiovascular risks or cardiovascular diseases. So it is not about the cups of coffee that increases your disease risk, but rather than it is the genetic makeup that determines response to the food that determines your overall risk. So it's always gene nutrient reactions which actually determines your overall risk rather than it's just a food or gene separately. So is that okay? Can we move on? Is somebody there?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So everything clear?
Yes.
All right. So the next aspect is I would take you to another example where we talk about sugar. So we always say that when you are dealing with weight loss and obesity patients, so they usually say that they have a sweet tooth, they keep they are addicted to it, they want to eat sugars, and if you give like one person one sweet, like one piece of sweet, then probably what happens is that they don't get satisfied with one piece, or it could be chocolates, it could be like Nepali sweets, country sweets, or it could be anything. So why or what's the reason behind it is it's also influenced by your genetics. So when you have like a genetic variant in particular genes, it makes you to predisposed to have like more sugar. It increases your sensitivity. So for example, we are like actually a group of people, right? But if you find a good chocolate from Switzerland, Swiss chocolates are like really known for it. So if you have like one piece of say Toblerone or one piece of any particular chocolate like that you like, Hershey's maybe, that's one of the brand that is like known worldwide. So if you get like one piece of chocolate, some get like satisfied with that one piece and stop. Whereas like there are few people who can't stop, they keep eating few other or like few more. Then what happens is that they don't stop at all, especially like when they are obese and when they have these cravings. So they don't stop because they have like a very poor sensitivity, and which is also influenced by your genetics. So it's not always what is available, it's not always the obesogenic environment that makes you predisposed to obesity, but it is also dependent on genetics, which actually determines your overall sensitivity. And they have identified certain genes, GLUT2 gene, it is actually a transporter gene. So if you have a variation in that particular gene, that actually makes you to eat more sugar. So this is also one of the aspects which becomes really helpful when you are counseling obese or like diabetes patient, because you will know it's a genetic predisposition rather than it's their habit. So if you're inbuilt in your body, then what happens is that it becomes more difficult for you to treat just by saying don't eat. So they have that cravings inbuilt in their body, in their genetics. So you need to really give some very specific information. So this is what we are doing. We are moving from a targeted one size fits all approach like a food pyramid to more targeted nutrition approach. So like as you saw in your coffee, it's not the cup of coffee that is actually determining your risk, but it's more of the individual's genetics that is actually making you predisposed. So here I have taken the pyramid which is used in India, published by the NIM. So here they say 2 to 3 servings of milk every day. But what if a person is lactose intolerant? And there are a lot of studies now published in the past 10 years that more people residing in the south of India are lactose intolerant. That is, they won't be able to metabolize lactose present in milk very efficiently. So if you're coming up with these pyramid, assuming that the entire population is almost the same, then what happens is that then these recommendations will do more harm to individuals rather than doing good. So it is very important that instead of looking at a population, if we start looking at the individuals for these requirements, it will be very helpful for them to reach out and then to take it like to comply with it in a more effective manner. So let's take this example graph, like the targeted nutrition approach. So you have base circumference here, and you have we have grouped people based on their dietary fiber intake. So you could see here a group of people having very less of dietary fiber, and here medium consumers, and here like people who consume more dietary fiber in their diet. So if you look at AA genotype, so this group of individuals, when they consume dietary fiber, so they really lose their inches in a more efficient manner. Whereas the AT and the TT, in spite of having high fiber, they still have a higher waist circumference. So the assumption that dietary fiber is good for everyone, high dietary fiber, is actually proven to be incorrect here, because so it's not all of them who eats dietary fiber gets benefited in the same manner, and the same applies to BMI. So dietary fiber is actually good, but it's not as good as for AA genotype. So if I find out through genetic testing, so you give your saliva sample, so you will know whether a person belongs to TT, AT, or AA. So this is what we find through genetic testing. So another example I want to say is, so if you want to study, or if this excites you, if the science excites you, it's more about molecular nutrition. I think we have all studied in our physiology and biochemistry, so understanding at a molecular level. So for example, if someone is vitamin B9 deficient, so folate deficiency is there, so we all think giving them folate will be sufficient enough. So we recommend like foods high in folate to overcome the folate deficiency. But the underlying factors are more like, if you could look at the cycle, metabolic cycle, or the folate metabolism. So it's not just the folate, but it's other vitamins are also involved, like vitamin B12 is involved, vitamin B6 is involved. So we need to make sure that these vitamins are also supplemented along with folate, rather than just giving folate. And folate is one nutrient that is always emphasized during pregnancy and conception, because it is involved in neural tube defects if given in insufficient amounts. But a particular gene, MTHFR, if people are having these genetic variation in this gene, they tend to metabolize or convert homocysteine to methionine in a very weak manner. Or I would say there is a reduced conversion rate between homocysteine and methionine. So for which what we suggest is, so one thing could be methionine restriction. So if such individuals restrict methionine from the diet, they could be benefited. And another thing is, as I mentioned before, we could supplement with vitamin B12, B6, B2, so for efficient folate metabolism. And in addition to this, we have also found out that supplementing them with 5-methylfolate would actually help them to overcome this conversion deficiency. And betaine and cysteine are also involved in the SAM cycle, which is again related with the methionine cycle. So if you want to understand the human metabolic individuality is again very essential to understand at a molecular level. So nutrigenetics is nothing but understanding understanding nutrition at a molecular level, what exactly is happening in your body at a cellular or molecular level. So coming back, I would say, how do you use this in practice? So we have spoken about research, we have spoken about the industry trend, what is exactly happening, but we need to really understand what is a genotype and phenotype. So you see, here you have like all these combinations. I told you A, C, and all that. So this is like homozygous. So there could be like these flowers coming from the same plant. It could be either purple or it could be white. And having this combinations determines the overall outcome in a plant. I just thought of giving you this example because it's easy to understand. So these are different combinations. So you get one pair from your mother and one from your father, right? So the same thing is, let's assume these could be the possible combination from our mother and father. So it is this genetic information is called as genotype. That is the combination determines the genotype, whereas the outcome or the physical characteristics or the traits are referred to as the phenotype. So this is what we need to understand as a dietitian. So far we have been looking at the phenotype. So we have been looking at the phenotypic characteristics for giving diet plans. So we looked at their BMI, we looked at the weight, we looked at their height, BMR, or waist circumference, so and their blood parameters, and then we saw the clinical signs and symptoms, and as well as we took a dietary recall. So these were all like phenotypic characteristics. But when you look at now how to combine the genotype and phenotype, so I've just taken this example. So see, like usually what we are doing it now is, if a person is having folate deficiency, so you would say test your homocysteine levels. And what are the signs and symptoms you probably follow is about like the vitamin B12 or folate deficiency. You look out for whether they're having fatigue, dizziness, and there are mouth sores of tingling sensation in arms and legs. So these are the signs and symptoms that you look out for. And you also take dietary recall. In addition, you ask specifically whether a person is vegetarian or non-vegetarian, and what would be the fruits and vegetable intake. So this is what we usually ask them. But now, in addition to all these parameters, you will also check for genetic information. There are certain genes that are involved with folate metabolism, MTHFR, MTR, CBS. So this is like combining both genetic and phenotypic information together is what nutrigenetics is all about. I've just given you an example. So we look out for ABCDs of dietary assessment, anthropometry, biomedical, clinical signs and symptoms, dietary assessment. So these are a few parameters we check out for. And in addition to this, you will have now genetics. So you have certain genetic markers associated with each parameters, and you will also check out for that, and what influence it has on these parameters is what we are going to check from now on. So I've just attached few snapshots of the reports. So this is how a nutrigenetic report looks like, with more graphical pictorial representations talking about like what type of a diet will suit your body and like what are the sensitivities. So all these will be given in a genetic report. And let's take another example of a genetic report snapshot. So it will be actually like this. So this is the gene that they're testing for to know your vitamin C requirement. And this is what your recommendation would be. This is what your risk would be, and they're giving the source of vitamin C. And this is for vitamin D. They are checking for CYP2R1 and GCG, and this is what the results that you get. So they say that it is elevated risk because you need more of vitamin D in your diet. So what you need to do is like, what are the sources of vitamin D and how do you get that is what the recommendation is. So it looks pretty much exciting and interesting to look at a more individualized specific recommendation rather than looking at very generic one. So if you want to say what are the personalized nutrition recommendations to prevent obesity, I've mentioned few. So this is actually quite impressive if you're giving something like this to your clients. So you look at the genes, And you also tell them like what are the food sources for that particular gene. For example, if it's an ADPOQ gene, so it's adiponectin inducing foods that you give, and this is what the food sources for increasing this adiponectin. Likewise, so we have developed gene specific recommendations, and we have given all these food sources for particular gene. So this is how you would be looking at nutrition in the future, where you're taking a gene and then like you're looking at the gene, how it works and what it causes, what effects it has, and what foods could be given for specifically for those genes. So now we are in a stage where we are moving from stratified or tailored nutrition to more of personalized nutrition. And then in the future, it will be more precision nutrition, where we are looking at various omics technologies together. Say like we are looking at blood data, we are collecting like genetic analysis, and we are doing like the omics analysis, like the gut microbiome and so on. So we are moving away. Right now we are here in a personalized nutrition. I think the way forward we will be looking at precision nutrition approach. So with this, I would like to wrap up and open the forum for questions. So in case if you want to ask more or interested to learn more about this, you can always check the website, and you can write to me personally. I've given the email address as well. And so these are the courses that we are offering at the Institute. These are all totally online. So if you're interested to pursue further, I think like there are a few dietitians from Nepal, students as well, who came like last year. I think it's a good sign that we are continuing association with Nepal year and year going forward. And so do write to me about if you're interested to pursue research, or if you want to pursue your kind of practice there in Nepal. I think no one has ever started something about nutrigenetics there, so it's high time somebody starts it. I think it's a good initiative from Nepal Dietitian Association. I thank Ms. Nani for giving me this opportunity. I think she is there, and let's open it for the questions from you. I would like to hear from you. Do you want to? Someone wants to start?
Hello, ma'am. Namaste.
Namaste.
Ma'am, this is me, Yogita Sapkota.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It was really very much informative. I just have a question that besides everything, I mean, is it cost effective?
I think there are different companies, Yogita. There are about 12 companies here. I'm not really sure if someone started it in Nepal, but in Indian currency, it's about like, it starts from 2,000 Indian rupees to 48,000 Indian rupees. It depends on what kind of test you want to do. It's just like your blood test. So you have labs to do blood tests there in Nepal, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to just do sugar, it is like about like maybe 100 rupees in India. I'm not really sure what's the standard there. So it depends on how many you want. And it was, I would say it was expensive, but now the prices have come down and the number of genetic markers that they are testing has gone up. So what I would suggest is it's more of looking at from an investment perspective. And to start with, you can introduce like one gene, like for one genetic marker, but the costs are somewhere between 9,000 rupees to 25,000 rupees.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
But I'm not really sure like what is the kind of market there, because you do have people who can afford it in Nepal. It's not that not anybody can afford it, but the affordability differs from a person to person. It's a quite relative term. So you might think 10,000 rupees is costly, but the other person could think it could be like lesser because it's only one time that you test for. It's not like a blood test where you need to go and repeatedly take these tests. So what I would suggest is just take it once, and then it's a kind of an investment for health. It's just like taking life insurance or health insurance, right? So it depends, but the price range goes from a company to company and with the number of markers that they are testing for.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Yogita.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am. Namaste. I have a question.
Yeah, namaste. Go ahead.
This is me, Tosna Karki. So I have a question that how easy it to convince the clients to go with this gene testing?
Um, I think it is not about convincing. If one person starts in Nepal, I think it would create a lot of awareness, and people will come and start asking you about nutrigenetic test. But now it's quite challenging for the first person to set the standard or set the path because no one
Yeah.
knows about that in your country. So it is first one is create that awareness, talk about individual nutrition, but rather than I think even for the diet plan, if you're running a clinic, you will understand if you are going and then convincing others to take a diet, it's hard. But if they are coming to you realizing the importance of diet, it's pretty much easier. So first thing is as a association or as an individual, I would suggest you to create that awareness in your community. That is first one. Second one is somebody is concerned about health, I think it will definitely, start looking at.
Mm.
Third, you can always talk about the positives of nutrigenetic testing so that it's actually, it will be really helpful for them. So like you don't have to do the trial and error. So you don't have to keep trying out. So for example, if I'm giving a diet for you in the first week,
Mm.
and if it is not working, then I tweak the diet and then I give the second time. So I'm taking 2, 3 weeks of yours and charging you without any results. But here it's more gene based, it's more individualized. So I can overcome that trial and error. So I don't have to. So usually in India, they charge about 1,000 or 2,000 per diet. So that's the maximum that they can go. And some people they also charge like 2,500 or 5,000. So what happens is that like instead of doing a lot of trial and error, so you would have heard about like people trying out different things like going to the gym, taking supplements, and doing many things, but they don't get results. Not even 100 gram they would have lost. In that case, you could actually test what is causing them a difficulty in losing weight. So instead of doing rough guesses, this could be one thing. Another one is you could tell them that this is the way forward where like we look at you at an individual level. So this could also be like portrayed from a preventive perspective. So you could actually, when you do the testing, you will also come to know what are the risks they are at. So if a person is predisposed to a particular disease, you can start telling him to what are the steps to be done for preventing that disease. That is actually more, I think that is the most the promising part of nutrigenetics. So you're not like you're not waiting for someone to acquire the disease. Probably you're also giving some precaution for that patient to actually do what is he required to do even before the disease comes up. I think that people will be interested. So you could find out points that people will be convinced. But first thing in country like Nepal, I would say awareness about this is first important. So if you dietitians, so if I think like there are 40 people, she said, but if each one of you try to, step out, talk about it when you're doing presentation, I think that will create a lot of sound in your country, and people will slowly start to ask you about what is this, and then you can start selling these genetic tests and do counseling based on it. That would be a smart way to do.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
All right. Any other questions? So, Fahima, she had
Ma'am,
asked for
it's me,
you.
Yogita again. I want to ask you another question too.
Yeah.
So in the presentation that you had given an example of coffee sensitivity, isn't it? So as a dietitian, in a certain diet plan, we usually include so many kinds of food, and we have in general thousands of food, and in a certain diet plan we have around 10 to 15 varieties of food. So I mean, how can we decide what kind of I mean, for 15 foods, if we include 15 foods in a diet plan, we have to do 15 kinds of individual taste for individual foods, or what is?
Okay, so this is actually a good question. See, there are panels that are developed by the companies. So what they do is, so they look out. So let's say, so the same applies to the diet plan that you're doing now. So how do we do it? So probably I'll just tell you an overall outline. So we will actually calculate the height, weight, BMI of a person, and you come up with the total calorie requirement, right? And then based on the total calorie requirement, so you start planning the diet, for which you will be assessing the person's medical history, dietary recall, clinical signs and symptoms, biomedical parameters. You will consider all these factors in addition to what is to the calorie requirement. And once you have all this information, so what you will do is you will start putting a diet plan, in the sense like how much of it should come from carbs, proteins, and fats. And then what you do, you will also consider micronutrients. So if there is any deficiency, then you will make sure that there is a balanced nutrition so that you get all the micronutrients are met with your diet plan. And if there is any food allergy or food intolerances, so you will be actually tweaking the diet based on these factors. So likewise, for a diet to be fundamentally designed, so you can split the requirements for macros, that is carbohydrates, protein, fats, or fiber, as well as you can think about micronutrients, all the fat soluble vitamins, water soluble minerals, and also essential compounds if it is necessary. And you will require information about food intolerances, food sensitivities, if that any exist. So the genetic markers are usually selected based on macros, micros, food sensitivities, and certain other compounds. So this is how you get, not just the caffeine part. If you do a genetic test, it comes like a package for a nutritionist to design the entire plan, diet plan. So what I could do is I could also share a file here if you want to. So it's like a sample or genetic report. So what you can do is you can go through the entire report. It will have almost like 100 or 500 plus genes in a report, that is that they are testing for. And they will be grouped under carbohydrates, proteins, fats, fiber, micronutrients, and so on. So what happens is you will be able to design a diet plan with a genetic report. So it will be a very comprehensive panel that they are chosen by these companies. So you don't have to say, go and check for caffeine, go and check for salt, go and check for lactose. But that is also possible with some companies. So if you want to just check lactose intolerance, the genes which are involved in lactose intolerance, you could actually go and then ask the client to get this tested for. But I think like once you look at the sample report, you will understand how a genetic report looks like. But you could actually frame a diet plan using a genetic report. That is how they have, designed it.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Actually, last time you had given that presentation in DFTQC in Nepal, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, and I was there in the presentation, and this time it made me more clear. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. I think one more question which was posted here, I'll just call it out. Sahima Shakia, she has asked, what is patients' view towards this type of personalized nutrition and how popular is it in India? I think, so I've been in this field for almost 6 to 7 years now. So initially there were a lot of challenges. People had doubts and people were not ready to believe and people were not ready to invest. But what we learned from this 6 to 7 years journey is you don't go to people and then start selling out or start suggesting these, but make them understand what the science is. People will come to you. That is one lesson learned. And second one is popular in India. It's becoming very popular because there are many industries like genetic testing companies who has come up. So initially there were only 4 companies in India. That is like each region had like one big company. But now there are also small companies which have started to, to do test on nutrition part. So what I would suggest is at least one person should take the initiative in Nepal to start this, and it will be very good if a dietitian takes that initiative because there is no competition for you right now. So to do that, or I mean, like even like more than one could do it, but start somewhere. You should start, and one person should start that initiative. So if you start and like giving I mean talks or seminars are held on this topic, probably people will start knowing that there is something existing, and then you can reach out to people. So there are a lot of things happening, but I think it's really nice to have such a online webinar conducted, because I think this information can be carried forward to many others by you. It's very important. And I think like in India, it's actually on a positive note. There are also a lot of dietitians who are taking this up in their practice. So, I mean, I think Sri Vidya and Tara, and there are a few students from CIT who came here and started their master's program. So they also did an internship. They did a 3-month-long internship. So it's quite, welcoming to see people are interested. But I think you should also keep continuing this if you want real big change. So thanks, Sahima, for asking this question. And Renu Yadav, so she had asked one question. I'll also quickly finish this. So the genotype is not recommended before giving the folate. So how it will be helpful? So you have to do the genetic test. So here it's becoming a practice for prenatal screening in India. If a woman becomes pregnant, it is very important to go through genetic screening to find out the risks like Down syndrome or any other risks, as well as now people are also into nutrigenetic tests. So you have to take the test if you want to, recommend the correct amount of folate. So now what is happening is you have a standard folate supplement given to all the pregnant women, but the genetic makeup will be different for different people. The same amount will not be sufficient. So it is very important that we need to really, start taking the test before giving any such recommendation. So what kind of gene test for not losing weight, although she is under very low carb diet along with physical exercises, is there are a group of genes that are involved, Rashmi. So it's not just like one gene that could be tested for, but we can find out if the person has predisposition for not losing weight. See, there are people could have certain genes. Even I have personally had few clients. They'll be really hitting the gym hard, like 2 to 3 hours, and they'll be eating one slice of bread, one cheese cube, and very little amount of diet. They will not lose even 1 gram, and they get dejected because they have certain genes that are, predisposing them not losing weight. So it's not the individual's fault, but it's their genetic makeup. It's their genetically wired. But again, like it's the role of the dietitian to say how they can actually lose weight in spite of having a genetic tendency. So that is what the whole science of nutrigenetics is all about. So I hope I answered your question. So it is not just one gene. There are a couple of genes that are involved to find the weight regain tendency of a person. So it could be FTO, it is like ADRB2, PPARG. There are a lot of genes that are involved. And usually they check out for these, these genes to find out how is the tendency of a person to lose weight. So that is the answer for your question, Rashmi. Renu Yadav again has come out with, but not MTHFR genotyping during Down syndrome. No, not with Down syndrome. What I mentioned was the genetic, how do you find the genotype is you have to do the genetic testing, and then only you can identify what is the genetic variation that a person is carrying. And once you find out what kind of a genotype a person is carrying, then you can start recommending what is the amount of folate or which form of folate has to be given. So for example, if a person is having a normal conversion efficiency, the recommended daily allowance is enough to meet the folate requirement. But if a person is having genetic variation, which actually reduces their conversion efficiency, then probably the normal amount of folate will not be enough. Instead, we need to supplement them with 5-methylfolate, which is more easily accessible form without, it need not undergo the conversion step. So how to identify those individuals is what the genetic testing does. So you can identify the individuals based on the genetic test, understand what genetic variation that they carry, and then give appropriate recommendation based on the MTHFR gene. And another question by Pratima Sen: what are the considerations we should take before performing nutrigenomic screening? See, first one is not everyone require nutrigenetic test. It is actually helpful for everyone, but with respect to affordability, and a second one is if the person is actually willing to take the test, then probably we should be going forward. So first one is you check with the client whether he is really willing. You need to be really transparent, but there are certain limitations in nutrigenetic testing. So for example, if someone wants to start practicing in Nepal, you need to have research evidences that the tests are done in Nepal and this is what the study results in. And same applies to India. So now what we are doing is we are taking the data from European or Caucasian population, and we are assuming that it would apply for Indian population as well. So first one is being very transparent to your patient about all these aspects. And second thing is about affordability of the patient. So you can't say everyone to take a test, like forcing individuals. So it has to come from willingness, has to be from the patient. And third one is there are certain ethics that needs to be followed while doing the nutrigenetic test, because it's a more confidential and sensitive information that you're obtaining from DNA sample. It is very important to set protocols in your clinic, such as you have to be very careful with a sample and you shouldn't disclose the name to anybody else, and the information should be protected with utmost care. So you can't just leave this information to anyone else without the consent of the patient. So all these has to be got in written records, has to be kept in written records. Like first one is consent letter or the consent form from the patient that this sample will be collected. And if you're storing it for future purposes, you also have to be, claiming it to be, you have to be very transparent in telling your customer, saying that the sample, DNA sample will be stored for later use, for future purposes. And once, if you're collecting the samples in your lab or clinic, then what happens is you have to be really careful in collecting the samples, disposing the sample kits, sending it to the lab, and you need to use stabilizers in order to, keep the DNA sample till it reaches the lab. And also once it reaches the lab, you have to keep it anonymous, saying that we don't usually disclose the name of the person. We use barcodes to communication so that it is anonymous. And you also have to receive the sample reports and give the client's report in a very sensitive, in a very careful manner, and it shouldn't be shared with anyone else without their permission. So these are few things that has to be kept in mind if you're practicing nutrigenetics, because there are various private companies which would be interested to acquire these data from you, because that's a very confidential data. So you need to be really aware of these ethics before getting into nutrigenetics. Otherwise, you're at a high risk for being sued by the customer or the patient, because they can sue you for very many reasons. First one, if they find out that you are disclosing any of their information, personal information, to any of the companies. So that is also comes under, under laws by, by default. So make sure that you are, considering all these before you set up nutrigenetic practice in your clinic. And hope I answered your question, Pratima. And second thing is, Sahima has a question on, again, how can we deal with patients with specific food allergy from nutrigenomic aspect? So food allergy is different, food intolerance is different, Sahima. Food allergy is where your body starts looking at a substance as a foreign body. For example, milk allergy. So if you're having like allergy, it could be like any component in milk where your body is looking at that as a foreign substance. Like that is where like antibody antigen reaction happens, and it is exhibited through symptoms like rashes, or it could be like redness or any other symptoms. Whereas when we talk about food intolerances, like the one I mentioned through genetics, it's mostly from a genetic variation perspective. So see, I'm also lactose intolerant to a certain level. So if I drink milk shakes or milk, like more than one glass, even ice creams, so I feel like bloated. And also in some cases, I also have diarrhea when I take more milk. Then this is because these are symptoms of intolerance. I don't get these symptoms if I take like half cup of tea or a small quantity, but if I have more milk. But that doesn't happen when I take curd or buttermilk. I can drink like 2-3 glasses of buttermilk in a day. So this is something like the gene that is, the type of gene that I carry is actually making me difficult to digest lactose in my lactose in the milk. So that is different, and milk allergy is different. So what you can get it from the nutrigenetic test is more from a food intolerance perspective. So let's say gluten intolerance, this caffeine intolerance, as well as how sensitive you are to sodium. But allergy is one separate thing. There will be genes involved in it, but we don't do any genetic testing in particular for this food allergy as such. So it's more of intolerances. So Sahima, is that okay? Or if you're still having doubts, please do ask me. And any other questions? Any other questions? I think people running their own clinic should start this first. I think you have a lot of freedom to start things on your own, and I think that has to start. And slowly it can go to hospitals and clinics. I think that's the way forward in Nepal. So anybody who has clinics, private clinics here? Are we going out with any more questions? Hello?
Hello, ma'am. I think no one has any question now.
Okay. All right. So can we wrap up, or is Nani there?
Yes, he might.
Okay.
Okay.
Janani?
Yes.
Hello?
I'm,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
This is Nani Silva. So thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And
I mean, I should thank you for this chance. It was very quick. You organized it really well. And I think, Nani, we can come up with something like we can do along with your association. Like we can come up with, kind of a very, a prize where like everybody in your association can take the course, or we can do more regular meetings to give an update or something, because everybody is interested in nutrigenetics. So, and also like if someone can start there, I think that would be really nice.
So do we need actually the special course for this? And what is the qualification and the cost for the course if we want? If some of our dietitians want to pursue nutrigenetics.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. If people are interested, maybe we can work out on a separate price for your association members, and we can do that separately for your members alone. Because in India, it's about the fee is about 9,900 for 45 days. But if a group of people are interested, then probably we can work on a special price only for your members, and we can take this as a collaborative measure, like our institute and your association can do it together.
Yes, thank you very much.
All
And
right.
also I thank all the participants, and I think they had wonderful insight on nutrigenetics.
Thank you so much, and please do share the contacts so that we will send you the updates from our institute as well. So once, if everyone shares their email contact, then probably we can send out the email newsletters to them also if they're interested.
So we'll send all the emails of our participants to you after this session.
Sure, please do. And thank you so much for organizing this. I also enjoyed. So have a nice weekend. Hope Corona lockdown is getting better there. It will get lifted soon.
Yes, and lockdown, I think lockdown has given us the opportunity to meet you and had this wonderful session.
Right, I agree with you. Thank you.
So thank you once again on behalf of all the executive members of Nepal Dietitian Association for this wonderful presentation, and for all the participants. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. We'll send all the contact details soon.
Sure, thank you.
Hello, Janani. Hello.
Yeah.
I think this is Usha Shah, our past president.
Okay.